Hello. Okay, so I'm the last talk of the day. If everyone could just wave their arms a little bit, just do this. Yes. I'll just take a photo for my mom. No, I'm kidding. Thank you for staying till the end of the day. I'm really excited to speak with you. So my talk is called Research for the Rest of Us. It's about contributing to your product's user experience, regardless of your role. My name is Rachel. I'm a user experience designer on the Chrome team. That means I spend my time creating the surface between a person and the piece of code that does something for them. So as I said, I work on the Chrome UX team, not just for the food, but because I care a lot about making things that are important, easy and delightful to use. In my free time, I run an event series called Munich Design Jam. That's where we bring together designers, developers, and entrepreneurs, and we try to build a product in just one day. I also spend some of my time attending mentorship events like the Google Startup Launchpad. That's a boot camp for startups where we take them through 5 days of core aspects of their product like user experience, strategy, technology, and marketing. And there's something I've seen in all of these venues, as well as with the clients that I used to freelance for. It's not that they all have goats, but working for startups in large companies, there always seems to be a sense of resistance when it comes to doing user research, and that's where I tend to see this face. I can see that many of you have worked in these venues before. So why is that? Well, user research in and of itself sounds really daunting. Despite seeming like yes, it seems heavy and expensive, and despite seeming like a really significant undertaking, it's often really unclear to stakeholders how qualitative, iterative research might tell them something that purchasing a user research report or a survey won't. And second, and sometimes even more importantly, talking to users is just scary. It's hard to take something that you've poured your blood and sweat and tears into and put it in front of a person who might tear it to shreds. And to make matters even worse, it's sometimes hard for people to think about what they might find out. And even further still, the farther along you are in the product development process, the more frightening it can become. So taking into account all of this fear and uncertainty, it's not surprising that I meet so many startups who haven't done user testing. So why is user testing so important? When you're developing a product, you need to check the assumptions that you've made so you can notice if you're off course and correct. This applies to everyone, but doubly so to small, runway-conscious startups. And it might seem scary to do, but if you find out that you're off course before launching your product, then there's still time to pivot. Ultimately, testing with users tells you this. It lets you know what to make and how to make it. So in my mind, all research maps to this spectrum between understanding your users' unmet needs and usability, finding out if you've made something that will actually work for them. Ooh, a notification. I don't think you guys see those, though. Or if you like, you can actually map the research directly to the process itself. So at each step of the way, you can advance forward from identifying user needs in the first phase, to learning the best way to meet those needs when you're ideating on different solutions for the product. Then you can check if your solution is usable during the design iteration of that product. And you can check to see if people are actually using your product once you've actually launched it. Okay, so in and all of that in itself, just doing the research is not enough. You're not finished when you've actually just written the report. Research shouldn't simply inform your product, but it should actually change it. It seems like an obvious statement, but I think anyone who's worked with a company that actually engages with user research might know that sometimes we just produce a report and move on, thinking, oh, we've informed ourselves, how nice. That's not enough to do. I want to say that insights from user research should become the backbone of your company and your product. And the best way I found to make that actually happen is to include your whole team in the research itself. So many notifications. And then the best way to bring in your stakeholders is to share tangible and visually rich anecdotes from the research. So people need to actually be able to tell stories in order to sort of disseminate those insights across your company, whether it's big or small. When it comes down to it, research is all about empathy. Seeing people try their products firsthand is the best way for your team to connect with users. And then again, sharing real, visually rich anecdotes is the next best thing for your stakeholders. It's in light of all of this empathy that the users, or for their users, that the team will understand the need to make those changes. Okay, so before I seem too credible, I want to show you this. I need to add the caveat that I'm not a researcher. The research process has a huge breadth of different methods that are possible, as well as it requires enormous skill and finesse to actually complete this kind of work with users. I'm just going to talk mainly about the processes I've been involved as a designer. Yeah. Okay, so here are some of the methods that I've worked with, and I'll talk to them in the case study coming up, but I'll talk to you first about what they actually mean. So intercept interviews, first and foremost, are very short, lightweight interviews that you might do in a public space. These are often about sort of understanding a really broad group of people, but with a very small amount of information. In contrast, in-home interviews are much longer, sometimes an hour or an hour and a half. And they're conducted in the home, obviously, in order to lend some comfort and context for the team and the user. Card sorts are a little more complex. They're when you take a set of cards with topics or themes, and you can sort them into categories. So this is a good way of learning about how people understand a set of information. For example, like a navigation menu of a website, whether entertainment falls under sports. So lastly, a usability test, which is one of my favorites, is when you put a user in front of your product and ask them to do a set of tasks. This lets you see if users can understand how your product works. A good example is putting your user in front of your website and asking them to buy your product. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some of these and how we, a number of different teams from Google, used some of these methods during a research trip to India at the beginning of this year. Okay, so it was a little bit insane. We took 16 different people across all different disciplines, including user experience, engineering, and product management, to 4 different cities in Maharashtra and West Bengal. So it all sounds very formal. If you can just picture in your head me shaking with a cup of chai at like 4 o'clock in the morning in the back of a van with like the translator pressed up against me sleeping in a really elegant way, then that's kind of the picture I want you to have in your head. So in 3 weeks, we worked in small teams to conduct 80 intercept interviews, 26 in-home interviews, and 8 visits to stores. We analyzed all of the data as a team in the field and compared it to a literature review that one of the researchers did and a diary study that they sort of handed out to all of our in-home participants and collected at the end of the 3 weeks. And that's how we did our research. So to break it down a little further, so if you can picture me now climbing out of the van in bright sunlight and 30-degree weather. So the in-home interviews were about an hour and a half long. We asked users questions about their behavior and preferences and had them show us how to do tasks on their phones, so kind of a combination between interview and usability test. We also did a card sort activity with them in order to learn about their information needs. So we took topics like shopping and, can't read that last one, marketplace, I think it says. And we asked them to tell us about how much they needed that information at what different times. So, once a week, once a month, this kind of thing. So conversely, the intercept interviews were only about 10 minutes long, and we used these to gather information about the types of mobile devices people used and how they used them. For that, you might picture sort of me and a small group of people running around a market or a bus station, interrupting people in their day and asking them questions with a translator on hand to kind of facilitate that process. Lastly, we visited stores to learn more about the experience of buying and selling mobile devices. One big insight from this was that most people in India didn't have email accounts or didn't have email accounts that they knew the password to, which is obviously a significant insight for us. So overall, we just did this by observing the process of buying and selling devices, and then we also conducted interviews with the vendors themselves. Throughout the process, we collected user stories. Here's one example. This is Rupa. She's the mother of 2 living in a very small village outside of Mumbai. She has a smartphone that she bought 6 months ago, which doesn't have a data plan. And her major information need is finding study materials for her 2 children. Since she doesn't speak any English, finding the right materials can be a big challenge for her. So often she asks a colleague at work to download those materials for her, and then they use a transfer program to transfer them to her phone. So after doing this research, we communicated our insights in the context of stories like these. I can't overemphasize how important this step is. Connecting user needs to the product is how you can make real change. I think most people here work at small startups, so that should be a lot easier for you because you can take everyone on your team and bring them into a room. But if you work at a larger company or if you have stakeholders or funders that you need to bring into that process, it's really, really important to actually communicate that information in as tangible a way as possible because it's hard to remember statistics unless you have a person in mind. Okay, so by learning from users in these different settings and using different methods, we were able to inform changes that we wanted to test in product. The way that we did this was we created prototypes of these different changes and followed up with remote usability testing to see how these work for users. I won't get too in-depth talking about remote usability testing today, but suffice to say that it's actually an incredibly effective method for gathering information, particularly if you have users that are not in the same place as you. So as you guys think about scaling up and thinking about building your companies internationally, that's something that I would definitely look into. We found it to be incredibly lightweight, it costs very little money, and it was actually quite easy to do. Okay, so some of the features that we built are already announced, like better optimization of websites for varying network quality and support for offline capabilities. Hooray! And so if you want, you can try out some of these new features via flags in Chrome. I think it's publicly called Dev, in the crummiest version of Chrome. Okay, so just to reiterate, we use this process to move from understanding user needs towards building a more usable solution. And we'll repeat this process as we build features and people use them so we can learn more over time and obviously iterate. Okay, so I mentioned before that user research sounds really daunting, and I obviously chose an incredibly daunting sounding example. Unfortunately, I didn't have something better that was already launched. So, but I want to talk very briefly about another method or a very similar method that anyone here can use, even if you're in a startup with one person or two people. So the method is called pulse testing. It's the approach of running a usability test with a very small group of users every 2 weeks. We identify the most important questions from a design and product perspective at any given moment, and we use prototypes to test them with users. So at the moment, I'm using this method with a very small team that's building a new product from the ground up internally, and I found it to be incredibly effective, especially because we're building something from scratch. It helps me check every couple of weeks whether we're going in the right direction, whether things are usable, and whether the whole concept resonates with people. So every 2 weeks, we take our insights, we identify the sort of low-hanging fruit, and we make those changes. Then we iterate on that each time. So I wanted to share this book, Rocket Surgery Made Easy by Steve Krug. This book describes a method or a process that's quite similar to the pulse usability testing method that we're using. It's pretty much the best resource I know at this point. The process itself can be done once a month in 4 hours, his process, and it includes a lunch hour debrief, and it costs less than 100 euros or probably about 100 pounds to do here. Yeah, and he also puts his script and video online for you to watch if you want to take a look at those. They're pretty informative. But just for context, here's a quick summary of the process that he runs people through. So you start by introducing yourself and setting the tester at ease, so telling them, obviously, you're not testing them, you're testing the product. You have them sign any kind of NDAs or legal agreements that you need to have them sign. Then you show the user the product, and you ask them if they can tell what it is. I'll get to that in a second. And then you give them a task and you watch them do it. And you don't help them. That's the hardest part. Just doing this really simple process can help you understand more than you would expect about your product. So I said I'd touch on that. I want to talk briefly about Seth Godin, who puts this another way, and I think what he has to say is really quite insightful, with the caveat that I worked for Seth for a period of time, so obviously my opinion is biased, but he says that this is what your users are thinking, or what they're asking themselves when they try your product. So first and foremost, what exactly is it? And this seems obvious, but you'd be surprised, even shocked, about how many products and websites and things that exist that people can't understand and don't have a clear understanding of what they are. So if your user can answer this question, then you're already well on your way. So the second thing that people are asking themselves when they try your product is, do I trust you? Again, this seems really obvious, but people make this judgment very quickly. A lot of research says that they make this judgment within the first few seconds of looking at your product. And the way that you can find out if they do trust your product is not by asking them that, but by asking them, what does this remind you of? The thing that people need sort of above all else is consistency. Trust and consistency are very closely linked for most people. So if, for example, you have a doctor's office website, and it looks like a doctor's office website, then most people will inherently trust it. But if it looks like a company that rents out clowns for birthday parties, then you might have a bit of a problem. So what does it remind you of? Thirdly, what is it offering me? This is just kind of the clear proposal of what it is that you're going to give people, and they should be able to know what that is and describe it in one sentence. And then lastly, they're asking themselves, how do I get it? This is the call to action, so obviously some kind of button that sends them to buy the thing or shows them how to do the thing or does the thing, whatever it is, that has to be clear. Okay, so if your product answers these questions for the user, then you're obviously well on your way. So I think we're getting close to the end of our time, and I want to leave you with a few remaining things. First, research isn't something you do, it's something you practice. You need to make it a part of your day-to-day in order to make real change within your small or large company. Second, the best way to make sure that that happens is to over-communicate. I use the word evangelize, which I don't use lightly. First and foremost, include your team in the research sessions themselves in order to build empathy. Reiterate your findings with them and the stakeholders who can't attend, and make sure to use media-rich content, pictures, stories, videos, as much as possible. Okay, and third, every user research session is a chance to change something about your product. Pick low-hanging fruit and change it right away. Test again and again with users to validate your decisions, and then rinse it and repeat. This is the best way to really change something. Okay, that's more than enough unsolicited advice from me. If you want to reach out to me after the conference, I can be found on the internets.